Well, welcome everyone to the Future Work Scotland. Delighted to be back. Don and I were just joking just before we came online. We had a bit of a nice, feels like a nice break. Our last session was at the beginning of July, but we've been busy doing lots of great things. Fun things. We had Agile 2023, which is a fantastic experience, Scotland experience, part of the main Orlando events. That was a fantastic experience. We had a workshop with Lisa and a whole bunch of other really cool things. And we'll do a whole bunch of announcements and things at the end of other things that are coming up that you might want to get involved in. This is your first time with us, very warm welcome to you. Those of you who've been with us before, very warm welcome back. Lovely to see you and have you here tonight. Just the usual formalities. We have a very simple code of conduct. Just be respectful of one another. That's the experience. That's all we ask. And we will have time at the end, as usual, for questions. If you do have questions that pop up along the way, just drop them into the chat. Prefix them with a Q, it helps us to spot them, and then we can relay them back to our speaker. And I'm delighted for our August session to be welcoming Will Van Der Walt to Future Work Scotland, all the way from Cape Town. Delighted to have him here. We had a fantastic pre-event organising conversation, so pretty excited about this session. Very appealing topic. Willem's a professional coach. He started out as a BA. It's pretty cool. And then he transitioned into Agile coaching, and he launched his own coaching practice in, I think it was 2020. Correct me if I'm wrong when it comes on. And we're thrilled that he's here to take us through this learning experience around how to lead with integrity. As I say, the topic's very appealing. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Will. Will, welcome to Future Work Scotland.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Donald. It's great being here with you guys. Also, from a systems perspective, acknowledging Erin, who introduced me to you too. I'm very grateful to be here. I'm very excited to talk about this topic. It's something I care deeply about. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to jump in. In a moment, or later this evening, I may invite you to join me in Mural. If you are Mural averse, or if you have screen fatigue in that sense, or if you are on a mobile phone, you may miss out on some of the stickies that other people write, but it's not a train smash. I'm going to be sharing the slide deck throughout. And an invitation, if you have questions as we're going through a bit of the exercises, you're welcome to engage me. And as we start, I'm also going to invite you, if you are brave enough, to think of a moment in recent history where you may or may not have lived into a bit of broken integrity yourself. Because this is what we are going to be working with, is to work with that as a topic. So see what comes up in your mind and in your heart. Choose something that's not too emotionally charged, and we may work with this a little bit later. Okay, are we ready to go? Cool. So you may see your faces in a second as I share my screen. Right. So I just want to check, can you see my screen, Seth? Okay, great, thank you. And I'm just minimizing this. Here we go. Right. So, what is leading with integrity? Why is this important? This is an approach to leadership that I've been curious about probably from about 6 years ago. At the time, I was a BA working in a large corporate in financial industry here in Cape Town, and promoted to a leadership role. And I started noticing challenges in my practice, and also listening to other leaders like product managers and product owners, technical leads, architects, senior leaders struggling with similar challenges. And my hope is that you'll find resonance with some of what is said, and that this approach can be immediately applied in your life and in your journey with teams. And that even though it may be simple to understand, acknowledging that the work is probably a little bit harder and could take a little bit longer. So I don't know whether something significant is going to shift for you individually today or tomorrow or next week. But I can tell you that in my life it has, and in people that I've worked with around this topic, there have been shifts as well. So I am a researcher practitioner as a coach. So I treat my practice as a research center. I hope to take this into more formal research and to validate some of my hypotheses. And so I'm also learning as I'm applying this and as I'm growing. And if you have questions and if you have feedback, we're very happy to hear about that. Okay, so let's jump in here. So what is leading with integrity? When we're talking about integrity from a leadership perspective, I'm hoping that by the end of today, there'll be a awareness that leading from integrity, at least in this framework, speaks to an internal sense of awareness, a situational awareness when I choose to apply it, and relational awareness. And why is awareness significant? Because research shows that when I become aware of something consistently, change is already becoming possible. So the mere fact of being able to be aware of something already gives me more information than what I would have had when I'm not aware in the moment. And then moving from a focus of doing to a way of being. So I don't know what your context is. Growing up in South Africa, which is as a white male Afrikaans, is pretty Christian in orientation. And in that sense, growing up, my understanding of integrity was always bound with moral judgment. And so oftentimes when we would have conversations about team integrity or leadership integrity as part of leadership development programs, there would immediately be a connotation for me with, I just need to do better. And as I started having conversations as a coach with other leaders, and as I journeyed with other leaders in my leadership development path, I noticed that there are similarities in what other people are feeling. And so there's this interesting relationship around what we believe integrity is with I need to do better, or integrity is what I do in the moment, which connotates judgments of right and wrong. So my hope is that with this process, we can move from a place of shameful orientation to a place of active choice. And I know that when this happens, there's usually also, with raised awareness, the ability to start relying on ourselves. Now, why this is important is because when you are in a disorientating circumstance in an organization, the only person you really have to rely on yourself when you have to make a split-second decision is yourself. And when we are facing complexity in organizations like we're going to unpack today, being able to rely on yourself and orientate yourself to what integrity means in the moment seems significant. So this is a sense-making approach, and sense-making in terms of making sense of what is going on right now, making sense of the problem, making sense of what I need to choose, making sense of what other people want me to choose. But it's more than that. It's also sense making in terms of what we're creating together with teams, with other leaders, up and down the hierarchy, and as whole organizations. So this is challenging sometimes, and it's made more difficult because of our connotations with moral judgment and integrity. My hope is that with what we're covering today, that at least that connotation can be shifted and seen differently, so that when we are working with integrity, we can see it from a systemic perspective, and we can see it from the complexity perspective that is really reflective of the reality that we're dealing with. Now, as we're jumping into this, I'm going to invite you to bring live examples. So when we do this, I'm trusting that there is an understanding of confidentiality in the call. I do have a case study that I have anonymized. So if we don't have live examples, that's fine. But if somebody does choose to share, I'm hoping that there is an understanding of what confidentiality means and that you are welcome to share your experience of your learning today, but not to disclose information about other people's lives and their stories. By show of hands, is it appropriate just to check if that is okay with everyone? Oh, I'm seeing some hands going up. Is anybody not okay with that? Speak now. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so what do we mean with integrity here? It's a collective and an inner knowing where the expression of who we are or who I am as it relates to an extension of my values aligns with the choices and the reality that I'm creating. So notice that it is both a collective orientation, a collective knowing, and an inner knowing. This is part of what sometimes gets difficult, is when we're leading, we have to be aware of what our beliefs are, what the organization values, as well as what our team values. And these are oftentimes in conflict with one another. So working with this knowing is a muscle that we start to exercise that helps us to do this work. So what is the actual problem that we're trying to solve? There are three main problems that I'd like to position here. My belief is that where there is misalignment in my values in any agent or any system, there is bound to have been or due to be broken integrity. The second is that in complex adaptive systems, more than one thing is always true at the same time. As a human being, I am a complex adaptive system. As a team, we are complex adaptive systems. We, as an organization, are also a complex adaptive system. So there are always contradictions where more than one contradicting thing is true at the same time. Now, what is leadership in this? As leaders, we are looked to provide direction and to make sense of all of the things that are contradictory at the same time. Because of knowledge work and because of segregation of duty, we trust that somebody else is going to, yes, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you, Will. It was just to call it out. A few people have put it in the chat. On your slide, there seems to be some grey sort of blocks appearing. I'm not sure what's causing that, but it is obscuring the copy. That's what you're saying, just so you're aware. I don't know whether you've seen that before.
It looks like Zoom. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I didn't see that. Right. I appreciate it. Thanks. Is that better?
One of them disappeared. There's still one appearing on the right-hand side. Yeah.
Okay, that's not on my... Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Thanks. Thank you. Cool. Okay, so as leaders, we are asked to lead through what is contradictory. And as knowledge workers, we are usually asked to only focus on one truth or two truths that is within our domain. So you can imagine that a team working on a complex project is focusing on what is within their interest to get their work done. Another team naturally focuses on theirs. A different level in the organization focuses on the larger objectives. And oftentimes there are challenges that arise in which we look to leaders for direction. We look to leaders to make sense of the inherent contradictions within the organization and to make difficult decisions. That's why they are there. They're there to help us through the complexity and at best to reduce the complexity so that we can get to the work. What we often forget is that within that stance as a leader, when things get difficult, the system in which we work with, or the system in which we work in, is not the same when things are pressured than when things are in a normal state of being. So what do I mean with this? As a Scrum Master and as an Agile coach, I very quickly realized when I started creating working agreements with teams, or alliances as we call them in coaching, that people talk about how they want to be together. So how do we want to make decisions? How do we want to be in conflict? Um, how do we want to treat one another? What is the vibe like in the team? What are our roles that we're playing? What does the team need? All of those conversations are beautiful and wonderful and productive. It creates a sense of belonging and certainty. And it all seems to go a little bit weird when there's pressure. I cannot tell you the amount of retrospectives that I've had on projects and within teams and within divisions, and after beautiful PI planning has happened, for example, on large scale, at the end when there were several production issues or when we missed the commitment. The system that is in the room when we're dealing with a issue of broken integrity doesn't seem to be the same system as the one that created the alliance. And so I started noticing in the conversations that the behavior of people, the mindset, in terms of how people show up, is also not the same. And it's almost as if those alliances just simply don't apply, or they don't help, they don't work. And I remained curious about this. And so my belief is, especially for leaders, as Marshall Acker says, leadership is a high stakes activity, especially for leaders. When we do values work, when we go and see a coach to establish our values, and when we align who we are to the values of the organization, a lot of that seems to be either showing up differently, or it's inaccessible, or it feels irrelevant when I'm faced with complexity and pressure at the same time. So dealing with high stakes led me to the work of David Cantor in structural dynamics, in which he essentially validates that hypothesis, and he brings in a concept around moral corruption. You see, what happens in systems is that when something does go awry and we are under pressure and we are in high stakes, not only is the system and the relationships that we're dealing with no longer the same, but the way in which we think about it is also not the same. And then because we have moral judgment about the topic of integrity, we stop inspecting, we stop inquiring, we stop aligning, and we stop adapting our working agreements. And because we're not engaging effectively around that, eventually there are ingredients that allow moral corruption. So an example of this is, I feel that I cannot talk about the team that let me down because culturally that is just not accepted. So having the voice of oppose or the voice of accountability missing in that instance gives permission for the system to remain as it is. That's just one example. We'll see a few examples, more examples of this later. So where there is moral judgment, leaders tend to want to work in isolation with what is happening for them. Teams want to work in isolation and solve it themselves, or even hide it, not make it transparent. And as a result, people tend to ignore or avoid this crucial work of leading with integrity. And because of the connotations of moral judgment, oftentimes when these things are raised by a voice of accountability within a system, we will find that the person who raises the moral objection is often made the problem. And that is another seed for moral corruption in the system over time. I'd like to check at this point, are there any questions?
There is one, well, just spotted it from Fred, who's asking, what is the reference for the moral corruption topic?
Cool. Thanks, Fred. So that comes from Reading the Room by David Cantor, his work on structural dynamics. So when he talks to moral corruption, he talks to specific face-to-face patterns and organizational patterns in which there are, my take on it, where people are standing in broken integrity because of conflict between two things that are true at the same time. His view would be that systemically something is chronically missing. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. All right. So, Sat, I wonder if you can help me just to put the mural link in the chat. We can sojourn to there.
Do it for you now. Right, I'll sit in the chat, everyone. Link to the mural, Will's mural.
Thank you. All right. So I see a few people are joining. So if you want to join me there, I'm going to invite a bit of a reflection around the problem that I just outlined. So if you click on my picture at the bottom of mural or follow me, I'm going to put down a request to be followed. You'll see a block where the text is the problem and the definition of the problem is position. I'm inviting you to take a few minutes just to reflect on how does this problem that I just discussed show up for you? And let's see what happens. If you don't know how to create a sticky, you can double click in the white space. Or if you want to, you can copy and paste the sticky that I'm about to put in now. Okay, seeing some people still typing. Gonna give us about 1 more minute. Okay. I'm gonna invite you to just take a second and look at what other people have written down. I'd like to hear from one or two of you what you notice. What are you noticing about others' contributions? Any volunteers?
I'd say I think different people have interpreted the action that we needed to do differently.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. So you're welcome to continue following me in the PowerPoint or just find a corresponding area in Mural if you prefer that. So I noticed a few questions around the link between integrity and values, and we're going to be exploring that in a second. So I'd like you to meet honest. Names and gender and everything else has been obscured for the lack of being able to identify who this is. But this person is a product manager in an organization and found themselves regularly torn between decisions that they were required to make that held multiple contradictions. So when I had a conversation with this person as a team lead, not in a coaching relationship, but as a team lead, they actually said that they feel that their full-time job is actually to keep tabs on who is holding which truth at the moment, and how to avoid them or how to frame information in a specific way to keep on ducking and diving contradictions that would blow up and disrupt the work that needs to be done. So an example of what this might look like is expressed here. So one thing is that the organization values getting results, and therefore they feel that they need to restructure the team. And this leader, they also feel that they need to bring stability so that the team can perform well. Both of these things are true, and they seem to be contradictory to one another. Everybody looks to the leader to make a decision. We need to urgently fix the production issue impacting on our clients, and going through all of the quality controls will take too long. But the impact on our clients are significant. Some people are literally hemorrhaging thousands of rands as we speak. So do we follow the compliance or do we try and fix things for our clients as soon as possible? I need to challenge the CEO's decision to steamroll his pet project into priority, but I want to be liked and I want to feel that I belong and have a future in this organization. So these are pretty obvious ones, and some of the contradictions are a little bit more nuanced. And oftentimes these are avoided for very good reason. And it leads us to a space in which we are reactive as leaders, as opposed to a space that we are creative as leaders. Now, what does all of this mean? My belief is if we can change how we work with integrity, seeing it from a systemic perspective, accepting reality as it is, and looking at it from a perspective of what we perceive reality to be, with all of the emotions, not suppressing the emotions, but including all of the emotions and consequences, then we might have a chance to address it more effectively in the future. And so this is the awareness that I'm talking about, that I'm hoping this perspective will land. Okay, so here is my belief, and this is what I've found in the work, that there is indeed a connection between integrity and values, but it's not necessarily the values that we espouse when we choose our values as a leader. Because when we are in high stakes, those values either seem distant or they seem inaccessible. So what I found when having conversations around broken integrity with several leaders and teams is that when we start looking at the behaviors, the choices, the emotions, by looking at the assumptions, the expectations, and the beliefs that happen in the split seconds before the choice that leads to broken integrity happens, we uncover other things that were being valued in the moment, which oftentimes are contradictory to the overall values that we choose to espouse as leaders. And that awareness, when we really look into what this means for the individual, for the team, often leads to the feeling of moral judgment or ineptness as an individual. So what occurred to me is that a potential use of Ken Wilber's integral quadratics may be useful for us to actually go and explore this. So using the subjective, objective, intersubjective, and interobjective frames, the work then becomes to stand still at every quadrant and to investigate what our assumptions, beliefs, and expectations were, to really go into a deep reflection on what was I thinking, what were my emotions, what came to mind in the moment, what is everything that informed this situation for me, what were the sensations in the moment, and what seemed to have led me to this place of broken integrity. And seeing it from that perspective starts to remove the moral judgment, especially when we start moving between objective behaviors and what it is that I was thinking, jumping between those two. And this is the model that I'm referring to over here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time to explain the model. I'm hoping that there may be sufficient awareness in the slide to lead us to a place of working with it. So what I do in group coaching here is I support people to define their own view on what integrity means for them. And I invite people to then also look at a few examples of where there was broken integrity, not speaking to values at all at the start. What we then explore is we start looking at the roles that people play in relationships. So, for example, if I have broken integrity, or if I have broken integrity, I may expect other people to pay the consequences. Or, which is more true for me, if I'm honest, I sometimes hope that other people will bear the consequences with me. And I know people who say, I bear the consequences alone, leave me alone. Let me bear it alone. All of these then can be played with a little bit in looking at different roles like the Joker or archetypes of Jung that help us to maybe understand a little bit more of what is going on for us. What is the role that we played in this specific moment or the specific example? If people don't resonate with this, although I find it easier when people do, I find it that they find it easier when they do. It's not necessary because I believe that the reflection through the model already helps to get to the juxtapositions that we need to face into. Right, so at this point, here's the invitation. I've invited you earlier today to consider an example of broken integrity. I'm going to invite you to think about that specific moment where your thoughts were, what emotions were coming up. Where was your focus and attention at that point in time? What were your immediate perceptions about the situation? If you want to jot those down, if you want to put them in stickies, you're welcome. If you want to do it on a piece of paper, you can do that too. If you just want to sit in silence, that's good as well. The next invitation would be for you to consider any expectations that you may have held of other people, of yourself, of a specific outcome. See if there are any beliefs about the situation, about yourself, about others. And see if there are any obvious assumptions that you might be sitting in. So what we're doing is we are systematically searching for assumptions and beliefs and expectations that hint towards what was being valued in the moment and searching for contradictions. So the product owner that I was, or product manager that I was working with at the time, one of the things that came up for them was a repeated pattern in which they wanted to be liked by the team, but they wanted to be respected by their leaders. And so this juxtaposition, even though it seemed obvious, led the product into quality compromises and broken processes and systems within the organization, as well as allowing decisions that weren't necessarily good for the organization, to keep it simple. And so what we worked with is realizing that at specific junctures, they were choosing one thing over the other, being liked by the team versus being respected by the leader. And it was at a point where they made a decision to say that I'm going to choose one over the other, or I'm going to choose neither and choose something else, that things started shifting for them. And that's what made me curious after that conversation about what this might mean. Because knowing that individual, I knew what their values were because we were in leadership development together. And it seemed interesting to me that this was a challenge that they were in, knowing the value that they were working with, which was vulnerability. And so my hypothesis was that, it's weird because if you're being vulnerable, then why couldn't you just simply say what was going on for you and be truthful about it? But that was not something that was accessible to them in these moments. And so when I started thinking through this in my life, I found many contradictions also where I wanted to be liked, but I wanted to be respected, or where I wanted to seem competent, but I didn't necessarily know how to ask for help because I didn't want to look stupid. These things seem small at first, but where there's broken integrity, they often lead to significant outcomes. So I'd like to open the floor. Is there anyone that has anything in mind that they'd like to ask or share?
Checking if there's any questions as well. There's nothing else. I can see the chat, so I think you might be okay
Okay.
for now. What
Okay,
what are you
cool.
what are you interested in reflections on at this point?
Say again, Seth?
I was just curious as to what is it what are you inviting the audience to reflect on or share?
Um, if there is anything that somebody would like to share from what they heard, any questions they might have, or something that they would like to share from what came up for them um,
Right.
throughout the conversation so far. Yes, Nia.
Hi, I'm not going to put my camera on. I'm doing three things at once. It was interesting that you were giving the example of the person called Honest. And I was wondering, where does confidence play in that? And somebody has posted in the chat underneath a comment that I made, how courage needs to feed confidence, and then that confidence can only really be brought to life when there is psychological safety in an organization. And I thought that was a really brilliant addition to the thought about confidence. So whether that individual wants to comment or share any thoughts about that, but it feels like that you first have to have internal safety, confidence. You have to be able to put your fear at the back to be able to move forward with this, and your organization has to be able to enable that around you. So it's a really interesting conversation.
Thanks for offering that. Would the person who offered the comment on fear and confidence like to share as well?
That was me. We may hear.
Okay.
Yeah, what I noticed personally for myself, just looking back at similar situations, like what you had with Honest, is that, yeah, even if I might have the personal courage to speak up, and I did at certain moments in time, but when I didn't feel psychologically safe, in the context, then it was really hard, to continue to keep doing that. And in fact, it got very emotionally taxing to have to deal with that, because my feeling of safety, was being attacked, or I didn't feel safe.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Sorry, Will. I just noticed Alan's asked in step 2, he's referring to your use of judgment, and he's asking, right, he feels it seems a bit ambiguous. So could you clarify your intent with the use of the term judgment?
Okay, cool. So I'll do that, and I'll come to Nia's input, and then Frederick, I see your hand as well. All right, so I was talking to moral judgment earlier, where if there's moral judgment in relation to the conversation around integrity, or where I'm starting to feel shame about what I'm reflecting, and I don't know exactly why yet, but what I've found in working with people is that specifically in organizations, it's useful to start with it by asking questions about behavior. And I'll move to the slide just now in Mural. If you're following me, you'll see it's there. To start with it, which sometimes is a little bit shorter in getting people to the root of what is going on than starting with I. I seems to take longer when we start there. Don't know why. But oftentimes when going into the questions around behavior, that connotates shame and judgment. And I think my hypothesis right now is because there's such a close correlation in our definition of integrity with moral judgment. And because integrity seems to be orientated, at least in my experience, to doing as opposed to a way of being. And to be within integrity is often, I think, there's messages there that really speak to I need to do something better in order to be a better person, and I either am or I'm not, which really defeats the purpose of developing integrity, right? And that's what I mean with judgment. If there's moral judgment going on, for some other reason, moving from it to I seems to alleviate that, and working with teams, moving from we, which is the collective space of reflection, to it, looking at the team's behavior, also seems to shift that. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, just coming off mute. Yeah, I think that that does to a degree. I was interested in as a step in the process because it feels like judgment could be, yes, moral judgment, 'cause that's what you discussed, but of what? Of yourself, of others, of the system that you're in, or is it an objective judgment? Most of what I see when I think in terms of the process that you're going through here with this talk is more about dissonance, surprise. That's kind of what sticks in my mind more than judgment.
Okay, thanks for naming that. I don't disagree. I think dissonance is an apt description of probably what I'm seeing going on at the root. I'm also aware, at least for me, and what I've noticed is that oftentimes when working with integrity, that issue around judgment, what is right and wrong, and shame comes up, which tends to get in the way. And I guess that's what I mean with that. And I follow, it's a hard follow in terms of dissonance. Nia, in terms of confidence, so when I was talking about getting to a place of self-trust, that would resonate for me in terms of meaning if we're talking about confidence. And so I guess, I don't know about you, but confidence sometimes can either come from, again, way of doing, and the work is really to develop that way of being, right? What are the things that are going to make me more confident? And if it comes with strife, I think it again comes to the same challenge. You know, forcing myself to be a better person, forcing myself to be confident, forcing myself to just be a better leader or to make the right decision doesn't seem to be helpful in high stakes. And when the stakes are high and when there's pressure, and multiple things are true at the same time, it's sometimes difficult to access high levels of confidence. That's my experience. I don't know if that resonates, which is part of what this process attempts to address over time. Does that answer your input, Nia?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting take, and I think what I'm hearing from our conversation this evening is that there are lots of ways to describe some of the terms that you're using that maybe in our context, maybe we use different terms, but actually the more we're talking about them, the more similar they are, or actually that they feed into each other, or that one is a definition of the other. So it's really, really interesting. Thank you.
Cool. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
in regards to, just now what you said about that you notice that it's easier to start with it rather than go to the I think one thing that I was thinking about is that maybe it's easier to start with it because there is a distance between, it's like looking at the questions that you have on the mural board. There is a question, the questions are about the situation, so it's separate from the identity of the person. And so in that sense, I think it's easier to look at it from that perspective. At least, it's like, okay, to look at, okay, what was the behavior, what actions were taken, what happened, what didn't happen, and there's nothing connected with like, oh, I did something wrong, and all that that comes with the morality.
Thanks for naming that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to walk through what I typically do in the conversations to land the approach. And then we can go into questions about 5 past, sir. Okay, great.
Yeah,
All right.
fine.
Right. Say again?
I was saying plenty of time. Yeah, it's fine. You've got time. Yeah, it's 5 to the hour. So yeah, all
Okay,
good.
perfect. Okay, so bringing it to essence, what we want to do is we want to enable ourselves and other people and our teams to be able to look at and look for the contradictions in what they valued in the moment. So the team, for example, does not want to get into trouble. They want to meet their deadline. They want to build a product of high quality. There already is a contradiction. So let's say that there's broken integrity around a process that has been missed. Oftentimes there are conversations of blame, or there's deference. And if I can use the word that Anna brought in, working with that dissonance will oftentimes reveal what it is that I valued in the moment higher than the other. If we start exploring the beliefs, assumptions, and expectations around that, it gives us an objective way to look at it. It gives us a very personal way to look at it as well. It helps us to have the conversations with others and to really look at what is going on for ourselves as leaders within the context that we're in. What's really interesting about this as well is that when we are looking at in detail, even answering the questions as they are there, answering that from somebody else's perspective, another leader I'm working with, or the CEO, if I were to put myself in the CEO's shoes, oftentimes what that reveals is possibilities of contradictions within the system itself. And that leads to the possibilities that we can start to choose. So the essence of what seems to shift for myself and for people that I've worked with around this is that we shift from a place of moral judgment and dissonance or contradiction to a place of possibilities and choice. And when we then form a hypothesis that we can test it with similar situations, what we do there is we start looking for similar contradictions where the same two patterns seem to show up. So how do these two patterns or contradictions or dissonances show up at work, in this work relationship, or in my marriage, or with my children, or with my parents, with my friends? Oftentimes you'll find similar situations coming up. And instead of having the moral judgment that, I need to do better, I need to be better, or what values am I going to choose to bring this in, it's sometimes just a small tweak in terms of having a conversation about expectations, or even letting an expectation go, or testing a belief, or simply being aware of the belief. So what I've also found is sometimes just having the awareness of those two different levels, even that is enough. Because in the moment, oftentimes, what I found, and what some people seem to reflect in the conversations as well, is that in the moment of crisis, all of this work that you've done isn't accessible to you. But somehow when we do the work and we trust that within the awareness, because of having the awareness, I think different possibilities already become available to us. The stakes are already lowered for us. We seem to see things from a different perspective, perhaps because we've done the work before. Now, does this take away from values work? No. Maybe it's a bridge between the values work that we do up front and the means to lower stakes when things get tough. What I've also found in the conversations with others is that doing this work helps us to look at integrity differently, looking at our behavior differently. It helps us to look at it from a place of who I want to be and who I am, what my choices are, as opposed to being beholden to our assumptions, beliefs, and expectations, and the contradictions that come with that. Now, looking at this, typically how I approach this is start with it when working with leaders, move into I. Oftentimes there's a little bit of a back and forth there. When I work with teams in a retrospective or in an incident, for example, then we would start with we and move into it's. If there's merit, then we might even go into I. It's really interesting that at the start, it's, which is the interobjective space, the space of policy, procedure, rules, governance, looking at how moral corruption and broken integrity shows up there seems to be a little bit more difficult. And it becomes easier when we start working with the others. And here's my suggestion. So start working on all quadrants around the same area of broken integrity, using the same example or similar examples that seem to be important to you right now. Focus on your function as a leader, working with it, and become adept at being aware of your behavior and the underlying orientation moment. Then work on I. Focus on I starts to grow your awareness, building that muscle, and starts to look at the assumptions, beliefs, and expectations and how they influence. And you'll notice that that starts to bolster your work in the it's quadrant, looking at your behavior, the choices that you make, the faces that you pull, the rolling of the eyes, or the closing down of emotional energy. With that, it seems to become easier to work with teams around this conversation as well. Looking at the collective behavior, the collective choices, what seems to be accessible and inaccessible to them when the stakes are high, and looking at the relationships and agreements that they have, either tacit or not. So an exercise I do there often is I would have the team draw out the relationships that they have. So person 1, person 2, 3, 4, and actually draw lines to represent or constellate and start noting down the qualities that those relationships hold and the agreements that are there, whether tacit or explicit. And then start looking at the assumptions, beliefs, and expectations and what they say about what the team values versus what their stakeholder value or what the organization values or the product owner values, as an example. And through that, it somehow makes it possible for us to start investigating the decisions made in an organization, the tools that are chosen, the policies put in place. No less are those things subject to assumptions, beliefs, and expectations, and also dissonances, Alan, to use your word. I think I really like that word, dissonances, that may be in imbalance in relation to the reality that we're facing. So, thoughts, comments, questions? I'm going to stop sharing.
Excellent. Yeah, no other questions in the chat, but yeah, happy to open up to the floor, folks. What other things intrigue you? Would you like Will to further expand on or delve into a little bit more deeply? They remain unclear, so great opportunity to get some clarification and make a bit more sense of it all. Debbie, you've got your hand up.
Hi there. Thanks very much, Will. I thought it was really interesting. Not something I'd really considered before, so could think about something different. My observation and question, I suppose, is that I think this looks like a good technique to look at things after they've happened. What I wonder is generally, if something has gone wrong, I try to think, how can we avoid that in future? And I wonder if you have any tips on how to avoid getting into that situation in the first place. Because one thing a previous line manager that I had did, which I thought was fantastic, was when anybody new started in her team, she'd say, you know, she'd be very welcoming, give them good objectives and stuff. But then she would also say, if I need to give you feedback, how do you like to receive it? So, you know, if I need to tell you you've done something wrong, are you happy that I just come over to your desk and tell you? Do you want me to put it in an email? Would you rather we go and have a conversation in another room? You know, because at some point I'm going to need to give you some feedback. What works for you? And I thought that was a really good way of approaching it, to deal with that upfront before the situation happened. And I wonder if there's any parallel kind of thoughts that you have about how to lead in a really proactive way to try to avoid getting to the situation where there is this broken integrity.
Great question, David. Thank you for raising that. So what I'm hearing happening in that instance, and correct me if I'm wrong, is creating proactively, creating the agreements and the alignments that clarify any expectations, beliefs, or assumptions that there may be. Would you say that is accurate?
Yeah, she would do that up front and set her objectives, but also check in advance how, if we got into a difficult position, how we should address it in a way that was going to work.
And so that is definitely something that I support. It's also one of the things that I do with teams and with leaders when we go into a team coaching agreement, is to create the alliance and the working agreement up front. And what I noticed is that when the stakes are high, where there's conflict and when there's pressure, when there's complexity where more than one thing is true at the same time, oftentimes those agreements wobble. And so I think you're probably accurate in saying that this is a framework that helps to make sense of things afterwards so that we can learn from it and grow a muscle of awareness in the moment to be able to check what is going on for me, what are the questions that I can ask, what am I hearing going on in the team, what is happening in the relationship between myself and the other person, what might I be valuing that they are not, what might they be valuing that is at dissonance with what's going on for me, being able to name that through building this awareness muscle. So how that shows up for me in the moment right now is that if I'm in a situation, sometimes even at home, in my personal relationships, if I'm in a situation, I'm looking at, okay, so what is my experience right now? What am I hearing? Right, what is the tacit agreement that I'm having with this person? What do they seem to be valuing right now? Where is this thing at odds? And what is really important? Where do we need to go? And that helps me to see things and experience things differently, where I can then engage more skillfully. It's something I had to develop over time. It's not something that was immediately accessible to me up front. So although, here's my answer. Although I value working agreements and alliances and that they do work, I also know that where there are systemic contradictions and high stakes, they are not always as effective, especially if there's not somebody objective to be able to support enforcing that. And so this is probably a means to try or to support sense making over time to address that. Does that answer your question?
I think what you've been talking around this there answers my question, in that although this technique you focused on is sort of retrospective, by working on it, you have started to apply that same thinking at the time when something is starting to become a problem, so that you're spotting immediately that you're getting into that situation and observing things more carefully so that you can hopefully prevent it becoming a bigger issue. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%.
Right. Great, thank you.
Cool.
Ben, you were next, I think. Your hand up. I've lost you on my screen. I think you are. Can you hear me? You froze. Fred, can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes.
yes. Will, do you give me the permission to give to jump on something you say and to add a background to complete maybe or nuance the answer you just gave? You just gave
Please.
on. Okay, so I worked. The beginning of my career was in maintenance, and in maintenance, of course, we spend a lot of time repairing things that are broken, but we would love to avoid these situations. And so looking at the structural integrity, I think that we can use the framework that you share from Ken Wilber to actually look regularly at what are the signs of breakage to get awareness of weakness, which may not be the retrospection, but how to say strategic foresight. So we can really use it the same way we would use it in maintenance. And the second thing is, I think the lady was hinting at something that I would like to thank her for. This idea of slowing down, the fact that integrity is something that you see through time. And so it is not just an event that it is broken. And so I'm wondering how we can indeed simply say, oh, wow, there are multiple signs that things are going wrong. What is still solid in our group? What can we still lean on? This is not a complete answer, but these were just two things that came to me.
So I don't have an answer to that right now. I guess what comes up for me as I'm hearing that is it would be a very interesting exploration to look into the positive future proactively, looking at perhaps from a solution focused perspective. That's what comes up for me. Given what I know about the moment of broken integrity, how would I like it to be? I guess my concern is if I'm still subject to the assumptions and the dissonances, to use Alan's word, if I'm still subject to the expectations, the assumptions, and the beliefs that brought me to the crisis in the first place, in high stakes, where would I be able to define that without necessarily unearthing that? And I don't know. So that's something I'd be very, very interested in actually exploring. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very good point.
Thank you. That's a great point. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Will. Alan, you had your hand up. You still want to ask a question?
Yeah, all right, since you called on me. I'm not sure this is a good question anymore. I'm just kind of stuck on you using the word integrity, and I was thinking about my recent situations, and it feels like what you're talking about is essentially two people, two actors with similar or shared goals, and that dissonance in perhaps their approach or beliefs about that goal. But a lot of my recent activity has been around actors who perhaps do not act with integrity, as I might understand it. Hostile actors who do not have a shared goal or even approximate goal. I was just wondering whether that's sort of something you'd thought about in this kind of model.
Sure. So I don't know the details, but what comes to mind for me is what might it look like in the weak quadrant? So what I have done in the past where I found myself at challenge with people that I have a specific perspective on. I don't want to label it as moral judgment because I can't say that about what you're experiencing. I would start with what is going on for me, what my thoughts are, what I'm valuing, what I'm expecting, and what brings about this response in me about what is going on. And then move into my behavior, and then move into what I see in their behavior. And specifically, very critically, carefully, mapping out what I see in the relationship between myself and them. And this takes time. My experience is that I can't do this in one sitting. So it takes time. It matures over time. What I can say, Alan, is that when I do persevere getting into the we space after working through what's going on for me, I oftentimes see things very differently. I don't just see how I have contributed to the challenge, but I also see how perhaps even my assessment of what has gone on may not necessarily be as solid as I thought it was. So there's an opportunity for me to start inquiring. There have been several times where with all of that work, my previous assumptions were still confirmed. And that then leaves me with a choice. Do I want to engage with them around a question? Hey, this is important to me. You seem to be valuing something else. This isn't working for me. For me in my domain, this is broken integrity. The results we're getting aren't reflecting our possibilities that we could attain. Can we have a conversation about it, please? And that's the whole purpose, I think, of uncovering the weak quadrant, is to have those collective conversations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just sort of opening it to your speculation, really, because I find this interesting. You mentioned sense making earlier, and obviously that sort of brings to mind Cynefin, and one of the weaknesses of Cynefin I always found is it's very rational and it ignores the human aspect. So that's why I was interested in this as an approach. Somebody else mentioned in another meetup mentioned about transactional analysis. That's another kind of psychological approach to this that I thought was useful.
Yeah.
So I just wanted your thoughts. Thank you.
Cool.
Didn't see any other hands raised and no other questions. Unless I've missed anything. Nothing in the chat. Any other final thoughts or questions from anyone? The remaining minutes, we've got a little bit of time. I can wrap it up. Yeah, I think we might be good. Well, oh, Fred's put something in, just a clarification. Cynefin takes into account the human factor. You want to expand on that, Fred? Quickly. You're muted.
Sorry. Oh,
I'm happy for you to expand on that briefly for Alan's benefit and anybody else's. Just to clarify what you mean.
Oh, I was just. Did you talk to me, Seth?
Yeah.
Okay. The point about Cynefin. Yeah, the point about Cynefin is just a very common misconception. When people look at the 4 quadrants, which are not quadrants at all, they tend to think that this is absolutely rational and this is the truth. But when you are part of the community and you discuss with practitioners of Cynefin, it's really important to see that there is an absolute, but there is also the relative, as in, for instance, if you are starting flying, this whole thing is going to seem completely chaotic to you. And then it may appear complex, and then it may appear complicated, and then it may appear very simple. As you get more and more familiar with a lot of information that when you get into the domain, you would not receive and process. So if you are part of the Cynefin hunt, you will see that actually the human factors are definitely in there, and that there is a relative relationship with domains that can make you feel complex or complicated, etc. That's why I texted it, because it wasn't core to integrity. My apologies for taking the time.
No, thank you for that. Valuable insight there. Good to get everyone's perspectives. I think we're probably getting to a good time. Oh, Ella, you can go for it.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about some of the phrasing that you've used tonight was very helpful for me. So just being aware of where a person is coming from in their values right now, things like being able to name it in the awareness bubble, and what is the person valuing right now. We've just gone through a whole values assessment in our team. So I think those were very helpful. So thank you. That was nice things to think about and how I can take them into my practice.
Give her feedback to that.
Sure.
That's probably a great place to I think bring that to a close. I think you've admirably answered a whole bunch of questions well. So thank you for that. Thanks for joining us. Great session. A lot to reflect on, I think. And lots to digest and pack. I see myself coming back to the recording. Looking at your slide pack, there's lots of good stuff in there. I think it's It's definitely a set of techniques that probably takes a little bit of practice to be applying them, and you probably, the more you apply these sorts of things, the more context you apply them to, I think the more you would get better at how to think about it and how to get value out. It's such a way of thinking, I think. So, no, fantastic, great. No, really, really great to have you along. Really good to host you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you to all of you for joining us and your awesome participation and contribution, which really makes the session. So I think we all learned a lot from each other this evening. So grateful to you all. Just a few shout outs in the remaining time. So we've got a whole bunch of other sessions for you, as you've probably seen in Meetup, right up till the end of the year. So we've got one last one. We're hoping a great end to our year. Donald and I are working on something in the background at the moment, so we hope to be in a position to share something really special with you all to close the year. But if you see, we do have a number of sessions over September, October, November. We'll have a great session next month on visualization tools with Holger. He's probably, you might know, I love his work. He's a fantastic visualizer. And then we've got a session around neurodiversity in October. And we've also got a new session that we've just put live that you may not have seen yet. Something slightly different. But Donald and I are very excited about it, and that's with Noel Arnold, who's doing a lot of great work, and he's got a great session on helping us all to improve our throughput of our reading, because most of us enjoy books. We've probably got, healthy backlogs. You can often see some of mine behind me, and of course I'm one of these many people who buy lots of books and then never find the time to get through them and read them. So he's got some really valuable advice on how to deal with that and how to approach that. So that's a nice, exciting session. So that's just gone in for November. A couple of other wider community shout outs for you all for we end the session. So some of you might know, Lean Agile Scotland's not that far away. So that's in September, middle of September. So that's the 13th to the 15th. So there's still time to book tickets for that if that's of interest to you. It's always a fantastic conference. Due to work commitments, I don't think I'm going to be there myself this year. Lots of good topics and workshops, etc. in the programme. And related to that, one of the speakers, Amar Pelhed, he has been in touch with us, and we're supporting him to promote a workshop that he's running after the conference for 2 days. Let me just drop this into the chat for you all, so you can take a look, see if this is of interest. And he does have a nice discount available as well. Limited, I think it's first 10, Donald, is that right? 5. Okay. And the discount code for that we can also share with you, which is, let me just drop this into the chat for you all. So if you are interested in that, take a look. It looks like a great session. That's the discount code I've just shared there as well. And you've got a nice discount on his workshop. So looks great. If that's of interest to you, that will be in person in Edinburgh. So if you're going to be in and around the Lean Agile Scotland, or you happen to be in Scotland at the time, might be worth checking that one out. And what else? Is there any other shout outs? Just going a little bit. Is there anything that anybody else is aware of they'd like to share with the group? You're welcome to do so in the remaining minutes or so. Any other events anybody's going to coming up? Any event you're hosting? Anything you think would be of interest to everyone? No? Nothing else? Fantastic. Well, if that's it, I'm going to bring it all to a close. So thanks again, Will, for joining us. Wonderful session. I really enjoyed it, and thanks everyone else for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all again. Reading sessions over the remainder of the year. We're really excited with the remainder of the programme. So yeah, thanks again, and stay safe, and look after yourselves, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
care.
everyone. Cheers.